Join Chris and Suzanne Vester today on Faith, Family, Fulfillment as they lead discussions on creating a strong bond and having a loving relationship through Christian values. Guests on the show share insightful stories and ideas to enhance a positive family upbringing and create trust in one another, as well as providing encouraging words of wisdom everyone should hear. And now, here are Chris and Suzanne.
Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Faith, Family, Fulfillment. I am your co-host, Chris.
And I'm Suzanne.
And we've got a couple with us that has probably the most least talked about type of story out there. We've got Jeff and Ali Wendt. Jeff is the pastor of Canvas Church, has been the pastor of the church since 2011. He and Ali have been married 14 months, and I can't wait to hear the whole origin story of how that happens. Jeff is the father of 5, if I got that number correct, right? And Ali has 2 children, both adopted. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so now it's a blended family of 7 children. Man, that's a lot going on in that household.
That's
crazy.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to pray us in, and then we'll start with some questions, okay?
Okay.
Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time. Thank you for this story, because we know in your sovereign plan that everything works for your good. And Jeff and Allie's story is definitely going to put a light to just how you work in everybody's life for their good. We ask that you get all the glory in this story. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I said you've been married 14 months.
Yes.
Yes.
Tell us the origin of how Jeff and Ali met. I know there was a text message. I saw that on Facebook, the screenshot of the text message, right? But give us some background.
You want to go? You want me to go? Well, so I'll say this. For some reason in our life, God thought that we needed to experience online dating platforms, which I have a whole level, new level of empathy for those who are searching for their spouse on an online dating platform, because it's
a rough process.
It's rough out there. So we actually met on Christian Mingle. That was the initial thing. And I was scrolling through and I saw Ali, and I think you can either hit heart, like you really like, or smiley face.
It's like a winky face.
Winky face. And I didn't want to come on too strong, right? I didn't want to seem overly excited or desperate. So I hit the winky face. And then Ali responded. Do you remember what you?
So I saw his profile. I didn't pay for the service. So when you don't pay, you only see a part of their profile. So I saw that he was a pastor. I saw that he was a widower, which I hadn't met anyone who was, and I thought he was really cute. So I got really excited seeing his profile. And so then, of course, way overthought, what do I say? What do I ask him? And ask a really lame question, where he went to school.
It's like a theological, what did you learn in seminary or something like that?
But so sent him a question, a message, and never heard back. And so that was that. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Not unusual for online dating.
So, I'll just say this, during that same time frame, I was at the point where I was like, I am just so over this online dating. I was just so done with it. I literally had a couple other profiles, I was on eHarmony. And so I just deleted all of them. I'm I'm just done with this. I'm like, God, I'm trusting you. Somehow, some way, I just felt through the network I had, somehow, some way, God would bring forth the next Mrs. Wendt, if that makes sense. Ali mentioned, I'm a widower. Ali was actually a widow as well. We have unique stories in how we came to those spaces in life. But I was like, okay, God, I'm trusting you for the next Mrs. Wendt, whatever that means. And so I just pulled off, and then.
Yeah. So then I got together with a friend of mine from Bible study. And, she was just asking me, how's dating going? And I had said,
it's pretty rough. And the only guy that I was really excited about, the way I said it was he's a pastor, he's a widower, and he's really cute. I never heard back from him. And she goes, do you mean Jeff? And I was like, what? Yeah, that was his name. And so she pulled up Facebook, pulled up his profile, and she's like, is this him? And I was like, that's his exact picture that I saw. Yes, that's him.
Wow.
And she's like, what? I grew up with him. I know him. He's an amazing human being. And so she was like, can I reach out to him and let him know, like, you know, I really think he'd want to connect with you. And so I said, sure. And so that's when she reached out to you.
So she reached out to me via Facebook Messenger, sent me a text and said, hey, I have this incredible individual. First of all, she said, are you interested in dating? I was like, well, sure. Like, you know, depending. And, you know, who do you know? What's the story? And I just shared about this incredible, one of her best friends who was also a widow, who walked through that and said, you know, even if you guys just grab coffee and talk, she said that Allie is one of the most incredible humans she's met. And I said, for sure, I'd love to. And so she sent me Allie's information. And then...
so this was like maybe late July of 2020.
2020. So this is the height of the pandemic. This is all the craziness.
Yeah, that's going on. So she gave him my number. And then again,
I didn't hear anything for a few weeks, 3-4 weeks. Right.
It's true.
And I was like, what's up with this guy? Like, if you're not interested, that's fine.
Well, so before that, during that season, I sent our friend a message saying, hey, I'm going on a road trip with the kids. I want to focus on the kids. And so, I was a widower, single father of 5 in pandemic. And it's August 2020 at this point. And we're like, let's go, like, the kids and I were like, let's go west. So we went on a road trip, saw some friends, went through Yellowstone, did the whole thing. And I really wanted to focus on the kids at that point. So that was kind of the, you know, when I get back, you know, I'll send a text or whatnot. And so I don't look good in this story. And I know this full well. I look like an absolute schmuck. And so, but continue. Like,
so I got the message, hey, he's got all these things going on. He still plans to reach out. And I just kind of tucked that
away, like, okay, if it happens, great. If it doesn't, that's fine too. Like, kind of just figured we weren't going to connect. It wasn't going to happen. But then in September, was it the 18th? Or
it was the 16th. It was a very important day for me. It was the 16th of September. And so I finally, like, in that moment, like, the kids are back in school for the first time in like 6 months. I'm in my office. I'm actually thinking a little bit more about myself. And it was just honestly, like, in that moment, I felt like it was a Holy Spirit moment. And the Holy Spirit's like, just text her. And I was like, fine. And it was like, literally, it was just like, I'm going to do it. And I did it. And I was like, hey, you know, Christopher, you mentioned the text. I put that out there, like how it all started. And I said, hey, Allie, this is Jeff Wendt. I got your number from a friend of ours. And I'm so sorry it's taken me so long to reach out. Would you still be interested in grabbing a cup of coffee? So that was on a Wednesday.
And I said, absolutely.
I was shocked. I was like, she's responding to me.
And so we met up that following Friday. So just 2 days later. Mm-hmm. And we met up at like 11
o'clock for coffee, and it turned into lunch. And then I had to go pick up kids from school at like 3. So we finally said goodbye. And before we left, Jeff was like, hey, can we do this again? And I was like, absolutely. So it kind of from there, it went quickly. We really had a strong sense very quickly that this was it.
Yeah. We weren't really dating for fun, because when you're a widow and a widower and you're a single father of 5 and a single mother of 2 and full-time jobs, full-time lives, it's not really like, hey, let's figure out if we like each other. Let's figure out, like, and I think part of the thing that it went, I mean, we met and were married in about 2.5 months. So time frame wise, when you say 14 months, like, we've known each other for about 17 months total, even to this point right now. Mm-hmm. And so part of that was like, okay, we know who we are in life. We know kind of what we want out of life. And part of it was like, I told Allie multiple times, I said, I'm coming at this like chest wide open, totally vulnerable to you. Date number 2, Allie asked me a question that kind of leveled me and kind of also made me realize that I needed her in my life forever. We were just talking about the way I was raised and what life was like, and my previous marriage and just the uniquenesses of that. And And she just asked me this question. And it was one of those questions that was incredibly intuitive, but it was also just very like, well, she's not trying to impress me. She's not putting on a front. She just said, the question was, have you ever truly needed anyone in your entire life? And I was like, wow, right? And at this time, I'm 44 years old. And, you know, I've done a lot in life, and it just kind of hit me. And that hit me. And I usually am not stuck for words, but I was, and I just kind of fumbled and bumbled. And it was one of those questions I kind of answered, but then it hit me even more that evening after I went home, and the next morning I woke up and just contemplating it. It made me realize, like, wow, it was such an intuitive question, so insightful. It made me realize, I'm like, I don't know if I've ever even been truly dependent upon God in my entire life. So it brought me to a point of like, wow, like, Lord, forgive me. And so it was one of those things that was like, I need her in my life. And so, yeah, that's what sealed the deal for me right there. Day 2, that question.
What a great question. I mean, and for the listeners that are listening, you had been a pastor at that point for 9 years.
Well, that's the lead pastor for 9 years, but I've been a youth pastor. I've been in ministry for about 26 years at this point. So
hearing a pastor say, it made me question whether I had even 100% relied on God. Man, what a great, I think we've had other guests, and they say, you know, it may make people question my salvation to realize that I struggle every day. Mm-hmm. But you're a guy that's been leading churches, and like you said, youth pastor for a while and lead pastor. Mm-hmm. Like, then for you to have that realization just on one question, have I ever really submitted? You know, that's super powerful, super powerful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Allie, what made you ask that question? What led to that? Do you remember?
You know, honestly, we were going so hard at like really discovering who each other was. And we were being really vulnerable. It was like, I'm not putting on a front because I don't want to get into something that isn't right. Like, I'm not trying to sell you something that isn't true about me. And so we had just spent so much time talking about like our hearts and who we really were. We had both been on such a journey of self-discovery in the process of, you know, grieving our spouses. And, you know, there's such a question of identity in that process. And so I think that's just so where I was at mentally. Just, who am I? Who are you? Like, yeah.
I think when you get to a space in life where, you know, no one plans on being and no one ever wants to be, but like when your spouse passes away and you find yourself as a widower or a widow, like the identity question is a huge piece, because literally, you know, scripturally speaking, the two become one. Mm-hmm. So there's this identity component that you're like, part of me is part of them, and part of them is part of me. And then that gets torn away, and all of a sudden you're in a new space and time, and you're like, who am I? Like, who, like, apart from my spouse, apart from, you know, biblically speaking, you're supposed to lean in, you're supposed to become one, you're supposed to build life together. And then that massive gaping wound and portion of you is removed. And then you kind of have to figure out who you are with God alone. You know, like, what's my identity when it truly is just me and Jesus? Mm-hmm. And so, and I think that's part of it, like Allie mentioned, like trying to be vulnerable, our authentic selves, like who we really are, not putting on fronts. Like, this is who me and Jesus are. We're not perfect. We're in process. Mm-hmm. You know, oftentimes feel like a mess, but he says we're a masterpiece. So it's like, you know.
And we both wanted that so much for our future marriage. Just that oneness and that intimacy and that ability to really dive deep. And so part of what it was just, it was kind of an invitation. Like, are you willing to go there?
Do we have that kind of chemistry and dynamic? Like, are you willing to reflect, and are you willing to talk about the tough things? I needed to know that was there.
That's good.
So, Allie, you sent us a little bit of information about you guys when we scheduled with you. I want to use your words because I think that they're incredibly pointing. And using your words of trauma, grief, growth, restoration, healing, and redemption. When you look now where you're sitting and you're looking back over the last, 5 years or so, can you see now like different pivot points in your life, you and Jeff both, where what you're wanting now and what you were looking for, and in that meeting and getting to know each other moments, can you see points where God was really preparing you and shaping you and opening you to possibilities?
Yes, absolutely. Like, and I think that's such a blessing, to be able to look back and see that. I think it's just a blessing to see the way that God has prepared us, the way that he's worked through these different challenges. I believe that's the case in everyone's life, but you're not always at a point where you can look back and reflect on that, if that makes sense. But absolutely. I remember kind of when it started for me, just praying a prayer, probably 7-8 years ago, of just frustration, feeling like I couldn't kind of break free with some things that I struggled with in my life. And I kind of just prayed, like, God, really take it all. And that's where the journey started, in even adopting our 2 little boys, and just what I learned through that, the struggle that we had, the growth that happened there. And yeah, there's just so many points where we look back and we're like, wow, God planted that dream or desire 10 years ago that's now come to fruition today.
I'll even say one perfect example from Allie's story, Suzanne, just the point where, a pivot point. Did God reveal something? Was there some point?
Like, tell them about the dream that you had and the challenges, the dream that you had about your family, and then even the challenges with that, and then where we're at today.
Well, so young, like I'm talking maybe 15 years old, I felt like God put it on my heart to adopt. I would literally just like imagine, scenarios of adopting and going to pick up a baby, or like these things would just play out in my head. And so it was just planted in my heart. And then, a little bit older, I was like, I want to have like a big, diverse family. Just imagining lots of kids of different color, kids, just all the things. I'm like, I want a big, diverse family. And then my husband, Tyler, and he was game for the adoption. And we also wanted to have kids biologically. And so we're like, all right, let's just, we were really laid back. We're like, we're going to try to have kids biologically. And if that doesn't happen, then we'll figure out from there. And didn't happen. And so we're like, maybe that's just God leading us to adopt first. And so we adopted Elijah. And then probably 2 years after, I started having major health issues and ended up having a hysterectomy. And so for us, it was like, oh, wow, okay, good thing that we're cool with adopting. Like that's how we're going to grow our family, And it was tough to process, but it was also like, God has prepared me for this already. He's already prepared my heart. And so that was such a gift. And then we adopted Amos, and we were talking like, okay, let's do a third. And so we're kind of on that road of building our family. And that's when Ty passed. And so with Ty passing, I kind of felt like that dream of like the big family also died. And I was just struggling so much as a single mom of 2 little boys. Amos was 9 months and Elijah was 3 years old. And it was so tough. Like there was no part of me that now wanted a big, huge family. And so it felt like it kind of like died a little bit in my heart. And then I meet Jeff.
Here's what's unique and crazy about the whole thing. Like when Allie told me that, I was just taken aback by it, because like
for me, like my wife Tiffany passed. There was a 3-year battle with cancer, and she passed of breast cancer in July of 2019. And I go through intensive counseling and lead my kids and myself and even the church through just the trauma of losing someone so dear and someone we all loved so much. And then I come to a space where I began to feel like there was always the missing and the mourning and the loss of Tiffany, but then a missing of, what it says in Genesis, that the wife is meant to be the easer, which is the helpmate. And I know oftentimes you hear helpmate and it seems like the female is the weaker gender and whatnot. But in that specific use of the word easer, like that's used 3 or 4 times to refer to the wife, but it's used an additional like 16 plus times to talk about God, like literally in Hebrew. So when you look at that, you're like, okay, there's nothing weak, obviously, about God, right? So when you find the helpmate suitable for you, it's as if it's, you know, it's a sign of God's favor on your life. And truly felt that way when I found Allie, but I was missing that in the loss of Tiffany. And I just remember when I started like dating and the online thing and putting my profile out there, I was like, widower, single father of 5. You know, I'm like, kids are a blessing, but in that scenario, I was like, this might seem like baggage, to be honest. You know, I'm like, who's going to want to marry a widower? Regardless of how extremely good looking Allie thought I was. Like, just had to throw that in there. I disagree with her, but I just thought, who's game for that? Like 5 kids, that's crazy if they're your own biological children, not to mention the idea of like becoming the mother or adopting these children. And so, you know, then I met Allie, we're talking and she shared this vision with me and I was like, hold on. God gave you a vision when you were like 15 years old of adopting and the idea of being the mother of a large, like multi-ethnic, multiracial family. And then you have a hysterectomy. Like only God could do that. So now Allie is the mother of 7 children from 3 different biological mothers. And she's never technically given birth. I mean, only God can do that, right? So when you ask like, what's a pivot point, like showing like, okay, God's in this story, that's a absolutely profound pivot point in the story.
For sure. What a blessing that story is. So Jeff, you and I met at an event in Utah, and one of the, we did a lot of breathing.
Yeah, we did.
A lot of Wim Hof breathing.
Yeah.
And, you know, the first time I'd ever experienced anything like that. But the breakthroughs that happened there, you know, you discussed, you know, dealing with grief, you know, going to counseling and leading your congregation in that. And I specifically remember, I think it was the day before we left, that it had been 8 months since your wife passed. Yeah. And that moment in our breathing exercises, the breakthrough that you had, was massive. Can you talk about how that worked into your grief, and have you been able to share that type of thing with Allie, right?
You know, I think I may have shared parts of it with you, but it was, you're right, Christopher, that was literally the 8-month mark when we were there in Utah. And we're in ice pools together and breathing and freezing and all the things. And then we're, you know, laying on our back and doing these deep Wim Hof breathing sessions. And, you know, and the idea is going to spaces in your heart and your mind. And I just remember for me, it was the day before we left. We're maybe 24 to 36 hours into this thing. And I just remember each time coming to a point, and they were just, you know, be very aware of what you're experiencing, what you're feeling. And, you know, and I just knew like my soul needed healing. When I talk about soul, when you read like in what the ancients used to consider their soul, it was their mind, their will, and their emotions. So for me, my mind, will, and my emotions, I was in a space where I'm like, okay, God, like I need deep healing. I need deep work here. And as I'm breathing deeply, like I literally am envisioning and walking through Psalm 23 in my mind, where it's like, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Right. And then we went on a mountain hike, and I walked through the valley of death, right? Not just the shadow, but of death. And I just remember, like, you're with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. They restore my soul, you know, and that's something, that's David writing that. And I just remember in that moment, that was for me, the moment of really like breakthrough. And I felt just like the weight of the world lifted. And, you know, I'd met you and some other amazingly incredible human beings. And part of me was that I felt a bit inauthentic, not sharing my story. And because I was like, these people are amazing, you know, and this group of individuals. And I just felt like, and I really truly believe it was a God moment as well, where it was like, it's a profound moment of healing for me, a profound moment of vulnerability for me. I'm not always the most vulnerable person. We talk about that. Sometimes I'm a bit guarded, but in that moment, I just felt like I had to do that. And I felt like it was a breakthrough moment for me and even for some others in the space. But that was a profoundly healing moment for me. I know even close family members, when I came back, they said something shifted in me in that time frame. And I think I truly believe it was God restoring my soul. I really, truly believe that was the moment, because my soul had been bruised and battered and beaten, and I mean, even broken in the loss of Tiffany and the 3 years leading up to cancer and building a church and being a father of 5. And that was not an easy season at all.
Allie, you talked on it about being able to look back and see the blessings, right? Being invited to that by Steve and going through that experience was just another thing that set you up. You said your words, I'm guarded, right? But something allowed her to see your heart. Because in the little bit that I've seen you, like the way you love people, man, you love people big, right? So I think that, like you said, something changed, so that just that small event, the effect that it had just a few months later, meeting Allie, even though you stubborn enough not to send a text until 2 months later and that kind of thing, I wanted to revisit that, right?
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you.
So Allie, Jeff talked about, going through therapy and things about dealing with grief. Like, what steps did you take when Tyler passed?
Yeah, I also went to therapy. I started studying the Enneagram. That was actually like a super huge piece of really breaking through and figuring out my identity, really understanding myself better. We're huge Enneagram geeks. Love just digging into it, but that helped a lot with healing. Just there were some patterns in my life, I guess, that weren't necessarily healthy in relationship. I'm an Enneagram 4, and so some things that 4s can tend to do is there's fear of abandonment. And so when there's an issue in a relationship, we'll distance and we'll kind of disconnect. And so I'd seen that pattern in my life many times, but really never understood or identified like what that was, where it was coming from. And so just digging into that much more was so amazing for me. I also just really started studying about wholeness and, just how to health and relationships, really digging down to the roots, like what your personal belief system is. Like when there's things in your life that you're just continually kind of frustrated with, like bad fruit, maybe patterns in relationships, whatever it is, it's like so often we're trying to correct the symptom rather than digging deep and really understanding like, why am I acting this way? Why am I reacting in these ways? Like, where is this fruit coming from? And so I started studying about that a ton too. And just, it was honestly just such a deep dive into me, who I am, who God has made me to be, and just getting freedom in a lot of things whether it's a blind spot or an insecurity or just unhealth, unhealed, wounds, whatever it was, holding me back in so many ways. I went after those pretty hard.
Sweet.
So we're coming up on time. So I just want to make a mention of that. But one of the things that impresses me as we're talking to you guys is you lead yourselves individually and together very, very well. And I think in order to progress and be able to be our best selves and be the ministry in the hands and feet that God intended, we have to lead ourselves well. Yeah. So if someone is listening who is perhaps, just kind of knee deep, eyeball deep into your situation similar to yours, how can they begin to lead themselves well so they can heal and they can become alive again and really open up so that their story can inspire and heal others?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like such a cliche, but one thing that we say often is to care for yourself first.
We both experienced, we had kids that were going through grief as well. And it can be just such a natural thing to focus on, your kids and steward the things God has given you, but neglect yourself. And one thing that I think we just kind of intuitively understood was that we're not going to steward anything well if we're not well ourselves. And so, sometimes I even did get criticism on how much I was doing for myself to heal and to get healthy. It took a lot of focus, but that was a key thing, is to give myself that time and to get the resources and things that I needed to become healthy for me. My boys were never going to be healthy if I wasn't.
So I just think that oftentimes people think that self-care is kind of hokey,
or self-care is even selfish.
Selfish, yeah.
Where I honestly think self-care is strategic. I got a visual early on when my wife passed, and even before that, like, when you get on a plane and the stewardess, they're going through, the flight attendants going through the whole spiel in case of loss of cabin pressure, be sure to put your mask on first before helping someone else. Like, that was kind of a bit of my picture moving through here, because I understood if I went sideways, my kids would go sideways. My staff at the church would go sideways. Those who attended the church would go sideways. So for me, it was like, I've got to make sure that I'm caring for myself first. And that was, holistically, Allie just mentioned the holistic piece. Like, it was mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, relationally, financially. I had to make sure that I was leading well in all those areas, leading myself well, because I think when someone is in a space where they're a widow or a widower, the amount of sympathy that you get can almost be intoxicating. And so you perpetuate this, I'm a victim, and you
always have an excuse in all things.
Oh yes, we could have blown money. We could have just done really inappropriate things outside of scripture. And people would have been like, well, I get it. They're in a horrible space. I can't imagine where they're at. I think we both were in the space where we determined we won't live that way. We're going to honor God in how we live, even in the worst moments or the hardest moments of our life. And Allie mentioned the word stewardship, and I think it's one of the core values of our lives. And one of my life mentors, you've had him on here, Ivy Benet Marsh. Ivy just has a phrase. He's like, how you do anything is how you do everything. So for us, we're like, okay, how I take care of my body actually is a depiction of how I take care of my bank account. And how I take care of my bank account is really a depiction of how I steward my spiritual life with God, and so we can't really separate one specific area when it comes to our holistic beings. And so we have to address them all. And so that was, when you talk about leadership and self-leadership, like self-care was so important, and it still is for us, because, John Maxwell talks about the first person that you lead is you. If I can't lead myself well, why would Allie follow me? And I have this thought process that if I can lead my wife, I can lead anyone. Not because she's difficult to lead, but she knows me best. She knows me in my worst moments. She knows me in my, no one on earth knows me better than Allie. And if she's willing to respect me and trust me and follow me, well, then that's great. And if she's not, well, that's not her fault. That's got to be, what am I not doing? I ask the guys at my church all the time, like, if your wife's not following you, are you worth following?
Right.
And it's not her. And anyways, that's just kind of, we're getting a whole different subject. I know there's time. I can talk about that all day. I'm so sorry. But that's the stewardship piece, and the self-leadership piece is key.
Yeah, you touched on. Go ahead.
I would also just add in surrender is a really big key as well. You could spend a lot of time and energy questioning and arguing with God.
Asking why.
The why. That's just time that's not well spent, honestly. Because we're not going to have
whys for a lot of things on this earth. We might later, but that's not what's going to bring healing. And so it's really just a surrender to him, a constant knowing that he's sovereign and he's in control, and this isn't a surprise for him, and that he is good and has a plan. And just the surrender to what the plan is, just realizing what depths we really try to control everything or think we know what's going to happen. And as soon as we're willing to kind of like see, wow, I'm not in control here, but God is, and that's the best place to be in. Like, he is in control, and just surrendering to that, that's a huge part of the healing.
That's all you write something down. Okay. So to touch on what you said, that, you know, Suzanne asked about self-leadership, and Allie's answer was surrender. So imagine the fact of leading yourself well is surrender. Like you know, most people think leadership, I've got to go and do, and I got to, like, and you said it, steward, like that's for sure steward, but steward based on surrender, you know, to his will and his way. You said something about self-care being strategic, and here's what I've heard a couple of times: the strategicness, right? If I don't even know if that's a word, strategy. Here's what I've learned through doing this podcast: I get to create all my own words. I just need to call it. So the strategic way that you dated, like that's going into the relationship. Jeff, you touched on it, knowing exactly who, like knowing who I am, know what I'm looking for. Allie was kind of the same way. And we've got 3 daughters, you know, 2 of them of dating age. And I say all the time, like, be strategic in your plan, who you're dating, be transparent, vulnerable, and strategic. And that might mean you get hurt a lot, right? But ultimately it will lead to a beautiful story like yours.
Yeah.
You know?
Amen.
So last question, I try to always ask this question because I think it's interesting. As a couple, just 2 of you combined, what would you say your couple superpower is? What's the one thing you do that's better than anyone?
I would say this, and I'll say, like you said, combined. So this is like 10% me and 90% Allie, just to clarify. Like, I think emotional intelligence, emotional awareness. I think Allie's like an emotional ninja. I was an emotional moron for a lot of years, and just unaware. Like, I'm an Enneagram 8, which at some points I can be great, and other points I say like I'm an 8-hole. And so it's just really, so just knowing my awareness of where I'm at and whatnot, and in leading people, like, you know, I would have conversations. I'd say something that just seemed so clear to me. It wasn't to them. It would cause emotional turmoil. I'm like, what just happened? And so I've learned through a lot of pain, but I think together, one of the greatest strengths we have is just our emotional awareness and our emotional intelligence. I think even with our kids, like, you know, in leading myself through grief and my 5 kids through grief, the loss of their mother, you know, ages 4 to 15. And I was always like psychoanalyzing them. And I was always kind of shrinking them. I'd say, like, okay, what are you walking through right now? Is this because, you know, you just lost mom, which is a huge thing? Or is it a developmental stage you're walking through? Or is it like you're 15 and you have like testosterone just streaming through your body and you have no idea how to deal with it, you know? And so we're walking, or is it a friend at school? Or is it, you know, like, so I think that was, it was never a, I guess, environment I ever wanted to be a part of, but because of, you know, the crisis and the loss of Tiffany, that was my reality. And I had a choice in that, how I wanted to respond, you know, or react to that. And the response was, okay, like, we're going to get through this together. So that was, I guess, kind of part of my training ground. There was some education before that as well. But then I meet Allie, and she's like an emotional ninja, like for real. Like, she's like, what's your core motivation and inner thought process of that? I'm like, what? Like, it hurt, but she was just, anyways, that's what I think. I think emotionally, like emotional awareness and seeing that in people, like Allie mentioned, the concept of, you know, oftentimes we focus on the fruit of something, which is kind of our reaction to something. It's the equivalent of, rather than the root of something, it's the equivalent of, hey, you have a cold, like, here, take a Kleenex to fix it, as opposed to actually addressing your diet and trying to boost your immune system, you know. And Allie, she's also super humble. Like, she actually wrote a curriculum called Rootworthy that talks about the focus of, like, too often we focus on the fruit of our life rather than the root of our life. And we don't know why we're continuing to get the fruit we get rather than focusing on the root. Because if you focus on the root, give the root the proper nutrition, you're going to get the proper fruit. And so, anyways, I'm going to quit talking and let you share if you have any thoughts.
I think that's a good answer. I do.
I talk 90% of the time. She's 90% more smarter.
Talker.
So
okay.
I just said more smarter. I don't think that works, but
we'll go with it.
Well, I feel that too, though.
Yeah.
I feel that here, not with you guys on this side of the camera.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. Is there any parting words, any advice you'd like to give people that might be going through? Like, what do you say to people that are dealing with the loss of a spouse? What would you say?
I'll say this, unless you want to go first. I always speak first, and then Allie speaks like
I'm a slower processor.
She says the best stuff. I think grief is a season, not a life sentence. Mm-hmm. I think some people, like the loss of a spouse becomes their identity rather than something that identifies them. Mm-hmm. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of the word widower because that wasn't my identity, but it identified me. And so I just think for me, like, it was like, okay, I attacked grief. I was like, I do not want to live in this for the rest of my life. I want this to be a season of grief, not a life sentence. Mm-hmm. And so if you're in that space right now, like, you can make a choice. You're not, a victim, even though sometimes you might feel like you're a victim. Mm-hmm. Like, you have a choice whether you want it to be just a season or a life sentence. And I don't mean to seem insensitive about that, because I will carry with me the loss of my wife, Tiffany, for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. Every day I see 5 faces that remind me of our life together and of who she was to me. And so, mm-hmm. not meaning to be insensitive, but I have no power to go back and change that. And if I don't have any power to go back and change it, why would I waste my time and energy? Allie mentioned the idea, like, asking the question why. I never asked it because I was like, that is above my pay grade. And even if God told me the answer to why, would I be satisfied? Probably not. So it was like, I'm going to use my time, effort, and energy to move through grief as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. And so in a healthy way, not burying it, because, like, you bury stuff and it comes out sideways, mm-hmm. And then you bleed on people that didn't cut you. And so it's as healthy as possible. Grief it can be a season, not a life sentence. And really the choice is yours.
And, what came to my mind, the biggest thing is just, Jeff and I had talked about how transformative the past 4 years of our lives have been. I've drawn near to God in a way that I never would have before. I've come
to a level of surrender and dependence that I never would have before, without really honestly being forced to. Through going through the trauma and the grief, I would have held on. Unfortunately, like, I can see that, or it would have taken years. And so the grief and tragedy in our lives can catapult us forward towards God in a way that just, I'm like, that honestly, it would have taken years for me to get to otherwise. And we ask ourselves, like, why and what's all the things that go into that? And I think there's a lot there, and we're still trying to unpack that. But, scripture tells us, count it all joy. And that can be really hard to understand. But we kind of get it now a little bit, being on the other side of it. Not that it's, like Jeff said, not that we've moved on and we never have grief, we never have sadness. That's not it. But we're in a place where we can honestly be thankful just for what God has done in our hearts, in our lives, and the relationship and dependence we have on Him now, the level of just dependence we live on a daily basis.
We've that level of surrender.
Yes.
But really, like, our lives at this point, like,
they're not ours anymore. We let go of that. Going through this process, we've let go of that, and we've realized it just in a way that you sometimes don't otherwise. And so there's not this holding on to everything so tightly and trying to control and trying to strive and make everything happen. It's like, all right, God, I'm here for you. I'm here as long as you have me here. Like, I just want to make an impact on your kingdom while I'm here.
Serve at the pleasure.
Yeah, and that's kind of the mindset and the heart that we've developed through all of it. And it's a great invitation and opportunity to draw near to him in that way.
Wow. Thank you for that wisdom. That was good. That was really good. How can people connect with you? I've been to your church, been to a service, and it was amazing. So I know if they're in the Northfield area, the best place you can get them is to the church on Sundays, right? But how else can people connect with you? They want to, if they're suffering from it, and they need to reach out and say, hey, I need help with this. What's the best way for them to reach you?
Honestly, you could message us on Instagram or Facebook. I think, can you add those if you add our social media on the podcast, that would be fantastic. That'd be a great way to connect with us. And that's something that, like we told you guys beforehand, we feel like this is our story to steward, and stewarding is like, we don't own it. We're open-handed with it. Like, okay, God, what do you want to do with it? Because we've walked through, we believe, for a purpose, right? And if we can help other people walk through their pain, we're all about it. We'd love to. And so that'd be a great way to connect.
Awesome. We can do that. We'll add it to the show notes. Jeff, will you pray us out, buddy?
I'd love to. Jesus, we're so grateful for friendships. We're so grateful for community. We're grateful for the Vesters and all that they're doing in your kingdom. God, and I just pray for those who are listening right now that maybe they listen on a regular basis, or maybe they've found this by what they think is just a coincidence. But God, we know there's no coincidence when it comes to you and your kingdom. And God, I pray even now that the words that were spoken, God, would edify, would encourage, would give hope. Maybe if you're even listening right now and you're like at the verge and you're about to give up, I just encourage you, do not give up. God has a plan for your life. He has a purpose for your life. Don't let the pain of what you're walking through cloud the purpose that God has for you, because you're here on purpose and for God's plan. And so I encourage you, keep going, keep fighting, keep praying, surrender your life to Jesus. I encourage you to do that. I pray a blessing upon the listeners today. I pray they'd be encouraged. I pray they'd go about their day in a way that they would care for themselves and steward themselves in such a way that God, it would open up an opportunity for you to use them and for you to reveal to them your plans for them, your good, pleasing, and perfect will, and that you'd entrust your kingdom into their care. That's my hope. That's my prayer. I'm so grateful for today. Thank you, Jesus, for all you do and for who you are. In your holy and precious name. Amen.
Amen. Guys, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Love you guys.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Faith, Family, Fulfillment, brought to you by Chris and Suzanne Vester. We hope you enjoyed listening to this week's guests and stories. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow Chris and Suzanne on Instagram at HVAUTOCOO and Suzanne.c.Vester. That's at SUZANNE.c.VESTER.